Here's how I put together my clutch in my H series KDX engine. I used to put it together, probably like most people, where you put the basket on, put the pressure plate on, start putting on your frictions, and the last step was always the tough one, where you're trying to line up the hub to the shaft and you're trying to get all of the steels lined up in the grooves, and it always took me a long time. It was always very frustrating. So doing it this way is very simple, much faster for me at least, and almost no frustration. The other thing that I like about this approach is that the pressure plate and the hub have to mesh correctly, so that way when you pull in and let out the clutch, pressure plate slides properly. If you put it together on the engine, you take a chance that if this pressure plate is just offset a little bit, the teeth or the notches aren't going to go into the grooves, and you're never going to be able to get any clamping force on your clutch pack, and it's not going to work correctly. So this approach, you can actually see it with your own two eyes that everything's lined up correctly. So the first step is to put your clutch hub down, and the other thing just to note is that I'm using an aftermarket basket because I've got the Recluse EXP auto clutch, but just start doing the friction, steel friction assembly, and a whole lot easier to get the steels lined up on the hub like this than with it on the engine and trying to jiggle everything around. Alright, so then there I just kind of get all of the friction fingers where they should be, put the pressure plate down. Alright, so don't know if I can show it on here, but I can see if I lift this up a little bit that everything is lined up correctly. So then keep holding it, because if you set it down right now, the pressure plate's just going to drop down and could get misaligned again. Take your springs, put in all four. Then, at this point, I just put in 2 bolts, and all I'm doing is tightening them down to where I just start to engage the spring. Because what I want to do now is I don't want the pressure plate to be able to separate, but I want all of the clutch fingers, or all the clutch plates, friction plates, to be able to slide around. Because now, get your basket out, and it's just a matter of moving the frictions around until it will drop into your basket. The looser you have the bolts, the easier it is to slide everything around. Everything's in place. Get your other 2 bolts in, and I usually don't torque these down to spec at this point, but with everything lined up, I don't want them moving, so I will tighten them down more. So I'm holding everything in place since it's all fitting properly. Make sure you check your manual before you torque these bolts down. It's not, you don't have to torque them much. It's easy to over tighten them, and you're either going to strip the post or break the post off completely from that pressure plate. Alright, that's enough tension to keep everything where it should be. Now you can just separate the pack, the hub, from the basket. There are 2 washers that are used on the H series engine. First washer goes against the inner race on the bearing. Get your bushing on. Now, with nothing else on here, it's super easy just to get your basket to drop between the 2 gears. So that's in place. This next washer is critical. This washer basically puts a gap or a space between this part of your hub and the basket. As you can see, as I've been working on getting this Barnett basket to fit, thought I had a washer that was thick enough, but when it was torqued down to the final spec, it compressed things just enough to where the basket or the hub just started rubbing. And if you were to leave this off or leave a washer off completely, you would basically be bolting the hub to the basket, making them one, and they would never spin independently of each other, and your clutch would never work correctly. So very important to have your washer. And this next step is very simple as well. Make sure your bike is in gear, and then reach around and grab your sprocket. And what you're basically going to do now is you're going to get your clutch started, and you're going to turn the sprocket until that shaft meshes up properly. Put pressure down, and as soon as things line up, you'll know it, and it'll slide right in place. Then you've got a washer that's concave, convex, depending on how you look at it, but you want to put it on where the part that's raised or kind of sticking up is facing away from the engine. And then get your nut put on, and tighten that to spec, tighten the 4 bolts to spec. The last part of it is you get your bearing, and then you've got your push rod. And I've seen clutches where there was just the push rod. I've seen it where there was 1 washer and up to 2 washers. And these washers are just spacing out this push rod, and that is just determining how much slack you have in your clutch cable that has to be either adjusted out at the perch or at that point in the cable. So the more washers you put on, the more this sticks out, and the less slack there is to have to take out with your cable or your perch. So that's all there is to getting clutch properly installed on a KDX engine.